Welcome to our second Vue.js Frankfurt meetup this year. This time we have the topic VUE.ing Playgrounds with Aws Amplify. And I'd like to shortly introduce our team. So we have Leah Dupp, which is an organizer and making the marketing for the Vue.js meetup Frankfurt, and also preparing the meetups on the meetup platform, also using the Twitter account to let people know about the meetup. And she's also doing marketing at Clickbar GmbH. We also have Chris Möbus, which is also an organizer, and he's CEO at Möbus Digital Solutions GmbH. The company is also creating AWS applications with mobile applications. And I'm Jan Frühwacht. I'm also organizer of the meetup, and I'm DevOps engineer at DB Systel. So first, I'd like to talk about something which we really need. We want you to have also presenting something in the future for our meetup. And we want to have this meetup more regularly. So if you have a topic which is interesting, Vue has such a broad area around testing, state management, the new composition API, whatever. If you're interested to present something, you can always learn something when presenting. So feel free to contact us either through our Twitter account, through our homepage, or write us a message on the meetup platform, and we'll organize a meetup. So this is the agenda for today. We will at the start shortly talk about who is this event for today. So what are we building today? And we'll start with the front end part, where we are creating a Vue3 application, how we can build a front end in parallel while the backend is created. We'll have a short introduction to GraphQL Faker, which is a helper library or a utility. And then we'll concentrate on creating the Vue3 app. And after we finish that, I'll push my changes into a Git repository. And then Chris will take over and create the backend with Aws Amplify, where he will initialize and configure Aws Amplify. He will show us how to do that on your machine. And after he set up everything, he will create the API and generate the client code to be added to the project. And we'll also see how the hosting with Aws Amplify is configured and connected to the Git repository. And at the end, we will see everything playing together. On the first part, the front-end application and the backend created in Aws Amplify. Who is this event for today? From our perspective, it's for beginners with Vue knowledge. So if you already started with Vue and have some knowledge, and also for beginners in AWS, because AWS is such a wide area with many services. Aws Amplify itself is a nice service for beginners, and Chris will show that why it is like that. So in future sessions, we also plan to take this application to more advanced levels. What are we building today? We will build a full stack web app to display Darmstadt's playgrounds, or have the possibility to have a backend with playgrounds around the world. And we will start with the front-end application with Vue3. So how did we build the front end in parallel? What we prepared until now is a GitHub repository with a clean Vue3.js project. And we created that project through the Vue CLI and just pushed the initial project. And as said, I first like to give you a short introduction into GraphQL Faker. It is an NPM package to create a local fake backend. And with GraphQL Faker, you can create fake data based on a GraphQL schema. It provides several fake types: image, text, location, but there are many more because the GraphQL Faker NPM package is based on Faker.js, and this provides 60+ fake types. And even if there's no fake data available to you, you will see what you can also do for random data for you. And also a nice feature, which we don't see today, but I think it's important that you should know it. If you have a GraphQL API somewhere in the backend, and the people that are developing the backend, for example, you want to create a new feature in a company and the backend didn't develop the feature yet, you can use GraphQL Faker to use it as a proxy. So the real API is proxied. You get real data with GraphQL Faker. And the new fields that are added through this feature, you can add in GraphQL Faker so that you have a mixed API of real data and the new data that you can implement your front end on. To start with GraphQL Faker, you have to git clone the repository, npm install, build it, and start it. I already did that, and we will have a look at that now. When you have executed npm run start, you will see 3 endpoints provided by GraphQL Faker. You have an interactive editor, which we will use now. You have the endpoint for the GraphQL API, and you have GraphQL Voyager, which is a visualization of your schema in the end. It's like an entity relationship model. We can have a short look at that soon. So let's look at GraphQL Faker. When starting the editor, we see a default schema provided by GraphQL Faker when you installed it. We don't use that for now. And I will paste the schema that me and Chris agreed upon on when we started the project. And here we see we have a playground. This is the root object or the root data type. And the playground has an ID, which generate the ID here generates a unique identifier, and the exclamation mark is for setting this as a required property. And then we have a name for the playground. We have a location, which is a subtype in the end. We have equipment property with a list of equipments. And until now, we have for the equipments, we only have 2 types, which is a slide and a swing. The equipment itself can have a name. And as said, there's a 1-to-n relationship from the playground to the equipment. And then we have a rating, which can be, for example, it could be words, or you can also have something like stars, 1 to 5 stars, for example. And we want to have an example image for each playground. So I will change the query now to so that I can receive all playgrounds through the API. And for that, I will have an array of playgrounds. And now I can save that schema, and I already can query my database. This is already saved from a prior usage. And this is the basic query to get data from the GraphQL API. And now I already get some data, which is not yet fake data. I just get really basic properties, and I see some data types here. And now I really want to fill this with fake data. I'll do some examples. I won't fill the whole schema, but for example, for the name, I will use a product name. You can provide a type, and with the auto completion, you get all different types that you can provide here. And I will use a product name, which is like an e-commerce product name. Then for the rating, there's no real data type. I can provide, and that's what I meant before, I can provide examples for my for a certain field, and then I provide an array with example values. And then randomly for the API, I get these values served. I forget the add. Yeah. And then for the image, you can also, there are some known providers for having example images on your page. I can also provide a fake type of this. I want to have an image URL, and I can even add keywords for having a certain kind of category of images. For that, I have an image keywords property, and here I provide play area, and I will also have a certain dimension for the images. So I want to have a width of 1,600 and a height of 900. I can save this now and see the first fake data already. So here we see an example name, fake name. We have the example value of 3, and we have a hero image. The hero image is a static URL, which is only generating a fake image on request. So whenever I make a new request, I get a new fake image. And then for the rest of the schema, I will now provide some prepared fake data because I think you got the gist of that fake data topic. Maybe one important thing, which is also really usable, whenever you create applications, it's also important to have dynamic lengths of lists, for example. And what you can also provide is I want to have a certain amount of list lengths here. I say I want a minimum of 4 records and a maximum of 10 records, for example. Yeah. So that's it for GraphQL Faker. Let's continue within the presentation. Let's first look at the creation of the Vue instance in Vue3. This changed a little bit in comparison to Vue2. The create app method is a new method. The data property now always needs to be a method, and the mount method is also a new method and replaces the old EL property where the application was bound to the DOM. Let's have a short look into this, because this has also a certain kind of effect. So this is the basic Vue project. And here we have the main JS file where the app is created. I have a snippet prepared how a new app in Vue2 could have looked like. And when we look at this, we see in Vue2, when you use the plugin, it was always on the global Vue instance. When you registered components globally, it was also on the Vue instance, also for directives. I know you can also register the components locally in local components so that they are only usable in child components. And also the directives could be also provided in lower components, but to register them globally, or you always use the Vue instance or the Vue global object. And in Vue3, this changed. You can, in Vue3, you see that there's a create app method, which is imported from Vue. And theoretically, I provided a small plugin, which I created, and the plugin provides a directive to be added to a Vue, to a DOM element. And with this, we could have a certain font color set. So the plugin itself for sure doesn't make sense, but I only want to illustrate it here. And if you want to use that plugin for this instance, I'll assign that instance to an app variable. And then for using that plugin, I would say app use and provide the first plugin. So as said, we can create 2 Vue apps, and we could now use the first plugin only on the first app instance and the second plugin only on the second instance. And this shows that the application itself is much more encapsulated in Vue3, and you have less global state. And regarding the mount method, this replaces the L selector or the L property from the old Vue, from the Vue2 version. And here we also see that you could provide a data property in Vue3. This is not possible anymore. It always has to be a function which returns an object with the data properties like this. Yeah. So that's it regarding the creation of the app, which I wanted to show you regarding Vue3. And I remove that code now and clean it a little bit up. And that should be it. Yeah, let's continue the presentation. The next step would be to create the playground list component. In the playground list component, we want to query our fake API that we created. We want to save the result of the API in the component state. And we also see a new feature where in the template syntax of Vue components, where you don't need a root element anymore. Let's have a look at this. So I will create the playground list component. And for that, we will create a template. And we will have a headline, playgrounds on AWS. And we also provide a div where we will later on render our cards in. And we also need some logic to query the API. I provide a name for the component. I'll create the data function, which returns our state. And here we have an array of objects. And when the component is mounted, we want to query our fake API. For querying the fake API, I first create an options object, which I want to use for the fetch API. For GraphQL, we always need to use the post method because we want to send the query as the body of the request. And as a header, I also want to set the content type to only accept application JSON. And as said, for the body, we will provide the query. For that, we will stringify the query with a query property. And for having a multi-line string, we use these literals. And what I will do now is copy our query from the faker and put that into the component. As this is only temporary, I implement now everything here in the component. Normally, I would say exclude this whole topic of querying the fake backend into a known JavaScript file and just call the functionality in here. But for simpler view of the code, I will just write everything here, and it's anyway replaced later on by Chris. And here I will query our fake endpoint, which is provided by GraphQL Faker here, and provide the options object that we created above. And the fetch API returns a promise. I think I have to provide also literal here. It returns a promise, where I receive the response. And let me first check this. I have an error here. I have to close the object. Yeah, should be fine. And I receive the response, and I want to have the JSON of the response. So this returns a new promise, and the data of that JSON is then received here, and I can output this as a first step to see if I receive my fake data. So for rendering this this component, I will remove everything here. I will replace the component and render the playground list component here. And there's still an error in here. Let me check. I didn't close the HTML DOM node. properly. And too much braces. So now we should see the component being rendered with a headline, and we should also see the API being queried in the console, at least for now. And here we see the object. It has a data property and an array with all the playgrounds with our fake data. Now let's first output the name of all the playgrounds. So we make a loop for identifying each DOM node. We need to provide a key. So for that, we use the ID of the playground. And then we want to output the name of the playground. And then we should see our first data here. Not yet. Let me check. I didn't assign the data to the state of the component, and that's why. So I will say data, use the data property, and all playgrounds. And now we see the first data here. So maybe you have already recognized it. This was not possible in Vue 2. And in Vue 2, you always had to wrap this something with another element. And in Vue 3, this is not necessary anymore. This has some implications. When you render the playground list component in the Vue app, I could, for example, provide an ID property from a normal DOM node and say this should be my, it should be passed to the playground list. As long as I have a root node, a single root node, Vue knows where to render the ID. So when we look at the DOM, we see that the test, the ID test is rendered at the root node. But if I remove this, Vue will give us a warning because there will be a non-prop attribute named ID. Here it says extraneous non-props attributes ID were passed to the component, but could not automatically inherit it. And Vue doesn't know where it should render this ID. And you as a developer can then decide where it should be rendered. With a V-bind, you can say, I want this magic attributes property be rendered at the div. And as soon as I've done this and I refresh, the warning is gone. And we will see that the ID is now rendered at the div where I provided that property. And that's one of the new features of Vue 3. I removed this now because I wanted to only show this as an example. And now let's create our playground card. Let's look into the presentation. The playground card component. What we will do is we will provide a playground object to the card. We will convert the card to a composition API, even if it's a bad example. We will see later on why. And we will also create a modal in that card, which will show the details of a playground. So let's start creating that component. I will create the playground card, and for that I have prepared a small snippet for the layout of a card. So we have a container here, and we have an SVG for displaying a single avatar. And here we want to render the playground name later on. And for the styling of the card, I'll provide some basic CSS. For the card to receive the data. We need to, first I'd like to provide a name for the card. This is optional, but I think it's always good to give components a name. And for the props, I will use the simple method now just to say we want to receive a playground, because you can also have an extended version of props where you define playground should be of type object, for example, and you can have a validation and so on. This goes much deeper into the props topic. For now, I will only say that the component should receive the playground. And I want to store some data here from the playground. For now, it should only receive a name. This should be taken from the playground, and the image should also be taken from the playground where we receive the hero image. And we will also replace the name here already to render the property. And to render the playground card in the playground list, I have to actually import it. I have to define that the component should be child component. And then I can replace this paragraph with the playground card component. And I will remove this rendering of the name and provide the binding for each playground to be passed. So each playground in the for loop will be passed to one of those cards. Yeah, and I forget to close this tag. That's why I have also a typo in here. Oops. Yeah. So now we should see our cards being rendered properly. Let's check this. Yeah, and now we see the cards already with the proper name being rendered. The layout of the cards is not that nice, so I will just add a small class to the div here and call this card wrapper and provide some basic styling. I want to use display flex. I want to have the cards being rendered at a new line when there's not enough space. And I want to have the space between the cards being evenly distributed. So now the layout should be better. And now let's render the image. For that, we'll use the image property here, and we'll use this as a background property. For that, I use the style attribute to be bound. And I set the background image. So as soon as you use CSS in JavaScript, and this is JavaScript because it's processed by Vue, you have to change the writing of the properties to how is it called? I think it's yeah, you have to remove the dashes in the end and use, I think it's kebab case if I'm not mistaken. You can write into the chat if you know better how it's called. So, and I want to render the image as a URL, and for that I will render the image property within the URL string here. Normally, this would also be a good way to use this as a computed property and render then only the computer property in here. I will keep this for now like this. And now we should see the images. Yeah, looks good. And then for showing the playground details, I want to add a modal. I will also paste the modal into that component. And also this is only for demonstration purposes. Normally you would have an extra component for the model. And for this, I have a model container here with already some logic, which I remove for now. And let me shortly comment this out. And for now, we want to just show the model and see how it's rendered. For that, we will add at the card where the name is rendered, we will add a button, which has an event on click. And I will introduce a new property, which is called model state open. This should be set to true if I'm clicking that. The button should have a detail string, a detail label in the end, and I have to create that state property as well in here. Initially, the model shouldn't be shown, so I set this to false. And then we'll see that the model is not being properly rendered right now. I didn't yet paste the styles for that model to be shown in a much better way, how a model should look like. And then we'll see that the model, just a moment. Yeah, the model is not showing up because I have to tell that div that it should have the class is open only if the model state is open, so that this this DOM node is only visible as soon as model state is true. So I'll tell that class property to have is open when model state is open. So whenever that is true, is open will be set as a class on this div. And I have to wrap this with braces because it's same like the style attribute here. This is processed as JavaScript. And now we see that the model is, because it's rendered deeply in that DOM, in that component, it's not showing properly. And now we come to the next feature of Vue3. There's a teleport component, and this was already available as a plugin for Vue2, but in Vue3, this is right built into the framework. So the teleport component is available out of the box, and it has an attribute called to. And in here, you can, for example, say body. I will first wrap this and close the teleport. And want to format the code a little bit. And the to attribute expects as at the body, or you can also provide a selector like this, render here. And for that selector, you would have to go into the index HTML and create a div like this with render here. And then that teleport component makes the model being rendered at that point. So for this, now we keep keep the index HTML like it is, and we will use the body, and then we will see that the model is in the end rendered properly above everything because it's now really in the DOM rendered outside of the body. We also see that it's now 4 times rendered. And until now, I didn't see a proper solution to this because my expectation would also be that I can replace the content at some point. But yeah, for our app, for now, it works properly. And what we also see is that the text here is not formatted because also it's outside of the app. For that, we can do a small fix and create the styles for on the body, remove the centering and the margin. And then we also have the same font size, the same font as in the app, in the Vue app. So what's next? We now have a playground card. We want to have the city, the street, and the zip code dynamically being rendered. So for that, we will create new properties. I will create the city, get it from the playground location object. And as the location has some additional attributes, I will just copy this over here. And we have the street. We have a zip code. And then for the map being rendered, we have a latitude and a longitude. And then I will render the properties in here. And for the latitude and longitude, I have a basic iframe where I generate Google Maps URL. There's also a much better way in a real Vue project. There's even a NPM package for importing maps component. I wanted to keep this as simple as possible, and I only pass these parameters to the Google Maps, and then it should be rendered inside the modal. Let's look at the modal. So the modal renders now our playground data, and we have a maps example in here. So that's it for this. And now I'd like to do a short touch on the composition API. So the composition API is really a big topic. This is only a short introduction, and I already can tell you this is a bad example because we only have data properties in here. And normally in that case, you wouldn't use the composition API. And it even only produces more lines. But I'd like to show you the way of using the composition API. And for that, I will convert this to provide everything through the setup method. So what is the idea of the composition API? Normally in Vue project or in Vue components, you can have methods per component. You have computed properties. You have watch properties, and logic around the same topic would be split into data, methods, computed, and watched. So your logic around one topic would be split in all of these parts of the component. And the composition API makes basically all these properties available as functions, which you can use in the setup method. And in the setup method, you can then group your logic really as blocks and make them also more usable, in my opinion. So for now, as said, we only convert the data here now. For that, I'd like to, the setup method needs to return an object for all the things that are provided to the component. And for that, I will convert this. So that all the properties are returned. And now I also need to create reactive variables for this data. For that, I will paste another block. And as nearly all of these properties are strings, I will create string reactive constants. And for the modal, we will create a reactive Boolean property. So this is the initial value that is assigned to the property. So now we have got empty refs. And what we see is we get the error message of ref is not defined. So we have to import the ref method from Vue. And we have to remove our data block. But before, because I need to use this again, I remove the data block. And now I want to assign the values here to these reactive properties. And as we use the props defined here, the way of using the props inside the setup method is using the first argument of the setup method, which is the props property. And to use this properly, I have to convert this props to my playground object. For that, I destructure the playground property in the props, which is provided to the card. And to get reactive properties inside the playground object, because the playground is a nested object, I need to use the refs method on props. So now I can use the playground object here, and I would first, so to assign a value to one of these reactive properties, I need to use name.value, for example. And for assigning the proper value, I use the playground object. And in here, I also have to use value to access the subtypes. And the modal state, I don't need to set through the playground. And then I exchange the commas with semicolons. And now I should be good to go. And now you see also why it's a bad decision for only converting a component with data to the composition API, because it produces much more lines of code and it's much worse to understand, in my opinion. So the toRefs method is not yet imported. Do this right here, and then we should be good to go and refresh our app. And everything works like before. So that's it regarding the Vue app. I will now commit my changes. And push them to the repository. And we'll continue into the presentation. So the last slide was about the card component. Then we also looked at the portals. And now I want to give you a summary of the new features again. So we looked at the create app method, which is new in Vue 3. We looked at fragments, and which are called the way of using components without a root node. And we looked at the composition API. At least really, this was really only scratching the surface. You should look into the documentation and read about the composition API, because there's so much to learn about it. Would also be nice for another meetup, I think. We learned about the teleports, the component, and there's also two other things that I like to mention, which you also should read into. There is the possibility of using V models, multiple V models, not for input fields, more for your custom components, to have two-way binding for your custom components. And there's a suspense component, which is experimental. And for that, I can also show you a small example. The suspense component, I think there's also a similar component in React. And what it does, it provides a basic way of saying, okay, I have a component which is rendered or created asynchronically because it fetches data from the API. And by default, when the async component is ready, it should render that component. As long as the async component is not ready, I will render a fallback, and this is the loading message. And this is what the suspense component is about in Vue3. So it's still experimental and the API can still be changed. So have a look at this. And I think from the presentation, we are now finished with the Vue app. And I will now hand over to Chris for creating the backend and connecting the Vue application.
So welcome to my little backend session. Thank you to Jan for creating the front end. Now we can continue with the AWS backend. As we mentioned before, we are building this with AWS Amplify. So what is AWS Amplify? It's a tool provided by AWS to simplify creating full stack apps. So you don't have to know exactly what AWS service needs to do for your apps. It's really simple to use. It's available for the most common languages and frameworks. For example, JavaScript, iOS, Flutter, and it provides a lot of out-of-the-box components. So an authenticator, it's a really complete component where you can manage login screens, for example, and much more. To get started with Amplify, we have to install the Amplify CLI globally. I will show this. So to install the Amplify CLI, you have to, I have to look up. I already installed it. So this is the command to install the Amplify CLI. You use the same command to update your CLI. Amplify is in very heavy development now. I can show you the changelog. And you can see there's a lot ongoing on this framework. So as we can see here with the dates, nearly every day there are new fixes or features. There was a new major change from 6 to 7, made a lot of issues. I also break some backend environments, makes a lot of fun. So let's continue with configuring the Amplify CLI locally on our machine. So we now installed the Amplify CLI and we can configure our project in this CLI. So I will showcase you this procedure. I have to switch. Okay, now we are using the Amplify CLI and we have to configure it. So we have to type in Amplify configure, and now we get guided through the process of creating a new Amplify user. Takes a moment. My MacBook is not the newest. Takes a little bit more. Okay, so we get automatically pushed to the AWS Management Console. Of course, you need an AWS account to get started with Amplify. And now we are at the console, so the CLI know we are logged in. And let's change to the studio code so we can press continue. Now we have to select our region. For us, we are EU Central 1, it's in Frankfurt, and we have to type in a new username for a new IAM user. So under the hood, Amplify will get a new IAM user in the backend to get all the permissions for Amplify. IAM is the service from AWS where you can set your permissions and policies, and Amplify would be a new user for us. Let's say Amplify new user. We are getting back to the console. Oh boy. So here's our username. So we need access key, programmatic access. Next, we can set the permissions. By default, we are always getting administrator access for Amplify. This is also recommended because Amplify uses a lot of services, and by the Amplify team, it's recommended that you always set the administrator access. We don't use tags, and we can review our new user, create a user. And now we are at a point we have to type in our access key and secret access key. For now, okay, press continue. Here you can see we have to type in the access key and the secret access key. I will cancel here because I already created this user, but it's also the last step for you when you newly created this user. So yeah, I will cancel this, and we can continue in the presentation. So we configured Amplify on our machine, and we are ready to use it. Next step is to create our API, so our GraphQL API. For this step, we have to initialize Amplify in our project first. So we type in Amplify init, and we get guided through another process. So now we are initializing Amplify for our front-end project. The step before with Amplify configure was for our machine. Here you can see there's another update, and we can enter a name for the project. So let's say Playgrounds Darmstadt. Now Amplify auto detects our environment. We're in the dev environment. Our source path, our JavaScript framework is Vue, so it auto detects everything for you. And if this is correct, we can continue. Yes. So under the hood, Amplify is for anybody who knows a bit more about AWS. Amplify creates CloudFormation templates for you. So CloudFormation templates are infrastructure as a code, and it helps you to automate your processes. And Amplify is a wrapper to simplify this process for you, and yeah, makes a lot of fun. So now we have to select our authentication method. Here I choose the newly created user. In your case, if you have set up a new user with Amplify configure, and now we are adding with this CloudFormation templates our resources in the cloud. This is the initial process with Amplify, so we can go to the AWS console and can watch in Amplify. There should be our newly created app visible. Here it is. And we can see our dev backend environment is deployed. We can see it here as well. Everything is okay. And we can see in our local project, there's a new directory. It's called Amplify. We are here inside this directory, we have the backend folder. For today, that's the most important folder for us. Hooks is a pretty new feature provided by Amplify, pretty cool. So you can hook at post push some kind of functionality. So assume you have pushed your production environment and you can configure a new function to create a notification in Slack so everybody gets notified, hey, production is pushed successfully, for example. But this would be a topic maybe for another talk. So inside our backend folder, there is nothing specific for now. We don't have configured any services. Here's a team provider JSON file. This is important if you are, of course, working in a team. So you can, of course, have multiple environments, backend environments. We can have a look at this later. And now it's time to create our API. And it's pretty cool with Amplify. So as I mentioned before, you don't have to know exactly the service names from AWS. You simply type in Amplify at API. Under the hood, our GraphQL API will be provided by Aws Appsync, and our database is provided by AWS DynamoDB. It's a NoSQL table. But if you aren't familiar with the services, it's really okay. With Amplify, you only have to type in at API. Here we can select, we want GraphQL API. My MacBook is burning. So here we have some configurations. We can change authorization mode. For now, we will continue with the API key. We can change expiration time from now. Conflict detection, also a really cool feature. So data store is another option from Amplify where you can build offline apps. So data store is a fully managed service to enable offline capabilities for your applications with nearly the same syntax as we will use now. But we will disable, we don't need this now. Now we can choose a template for our schema. When you already have an idea how will your schema look like, you can choose between one-to-many relationship or the single. Because we already know our schema, we continue with the blank schema. And we want to edit it now. Studio code. And a new file will open. So we can see in our local environment, the new schema GraphQL file is created. We have an entire new directory for our API with resolvers, and we can copy our playground data scheme. You saw this scheme before. For Amplify, we have to do a little modification. I have typed in the model directive. The model directive, Amplify now knows that this playground gets its own data table. So playground has its own NoSQL table in DynamoDB. And the other data types are only nested in this playground. So if we want to have location, to have its own data table, we can also provide it by typing in the directive add model. You can do a lot with this directive. Directives, you have authentication sorry, directives. This would be also a feature for the future. As we mentioned before, this meetup here is the initial project, and we would like to extend it more. Yes, so we can save it. And now all you have to do to push your local changes, you have locally created your API. If you want to push it in the cloud, to the cloud, all you have to do is to type in Amplify push. And that's the most capacity consuming process. So I will guess my MacBook is flying away soon. I hope I will survive. What Amplify now does is it's checking what have you already in the backend, in the cloud, and what's on your local backend. And this differences you can read here. So operation create, because in our cloud backend, the Amplify isn't there for now. Are you sure you want to continue? Yes. And now we have another very, very cool feature from Amplify. We have an auto code generator. So Amplify, this code generator is looking at our schema. We will continue. We can choose our programming language. I will continue with JavaScript. Where should this file be stored? This looks good. And we would like to generate all operations. Short break. So here we have to provide our statement depth. 2 for us is at the moment enough. If we have a highly deep nested data structure, we have to increase this number, so this code generator will know how deep it should go. But 2, it's okay. So now it's pushing our changes to the cloud. We can look at this. Now we can see deployment is in progress again. No enabled categories. This would change soon. We can look at AWS Appsync. So Appsync is the service where our GraphQL API is managed. Oh boy. I will provide you a donation link at the end for my new laptop. Here we can see our API. I think it isn't created when it finished yet. It isn't finished now. So we can go to queries. And here we can select what we want. So we want mutation because we want to create playgrounds later. This is how this looks in the Appsync console. Yeah, pretty self-explaining. We can look, it continues. Now deployment is completed in our console. but no API category is shown. Maybe a refresh. Help. No, this could take 1 or 2 minutes more than the push operation. So we can see our push was successful. Here we have our new endpoint and our API key. And as I mentioned before, this cool feature with the GraphQL code generator provided us some very nice files. So here we have all our possible queries, in this case mutations, queries or subscriptions. So you can also subscribe to data if you want real-time updates about your data. And this is only out of the box, the out of the box queries. So you can also modify or create your own queries. If this doesn't fit for you, it's also no problem. And now we should see the API category in the console. Yes, here it is. So it's everything successfully pushed to the cloud. Now we want to use this, of course, in our app. To do this, we are going to our main.js and we are importing the AWS Amplify. I have to look. And while we are typing this, of course, we need to install it. I guess it's this. Made a mistake. So we are importing the components. So we are importing Amplify, the whole framework, and configuring it with the AWS exports file. This file is here. And in this file, our configuration is stored. So here you can see our endpoint, our authentication type. We provided it by an API key, and of course the API key. And this file usually is in git ignore. So while this is installing, we can create a playground. We are back in the Appsync console. As Jan mentioned before, in our schema, we have some required fields and we have some optional fields. Our required fields was the ID and longitude and latitude. So you can see the required properties with a star. At the ID, there's no star because ID is this property in Appsync. When you don't provide an ID, you get it auto-created by Appsync, so it's a normal UUID. I have some backgrounds here where I can paste this in. Okay. And longitude, let's start with 1. No, not undefined. Okay, so city, Darmstadt. Street, this would be Johannisplatz. Oh, shame on me. I don't know the zip from Darmstadt. I will type the zip from Riedstadt. So hero image, I will use the same as Jan. And now we can create our, okay, we can provide a name. And the blue values are return types. So if you want to you want to see the return values, I will go with the ID. So you can see the ID. We now created our first playground, and we can go back to our project. And yeah, it doesn't finish installing the library, but we can proceed with implementing the API call. So we have to import the API components from AWS to use it here. And we can import our auto-generated query. This should be here. GraphQL. So this is everything we have to import, and now we can do the coding for this. This is really, really simple. As you can see now, we can comment out the code from Jan. And all I have to do is the following. So this is our complete call to the backend, and we make this async. And yes, as soon as this finished, so we can log this. Sorry for the delay. So for now, we're ready to go. Okay, to bridge this time, I can show you hosting with Amplify. We are getting back to the Amplify console. Front-end environment. Here we can choose our where we are storing our front-end repository. We have this in GitHub. Then you have to authenticate your GitHub account. I'm already logged in, so this should be done automatically. Now I can select a repository. Here it is. My branch. This is the branch we are working on. Next. Here we can choose our backend environment, enable continuous deployment. These are some default settings, which are most of the cases good. We can proceed and we can click save and deploy, and we should be fine. So this should trigger the first build. You can see this is the build process, and we already have our URL where we can see our app as soon as it is finished. Oh, wow, finally. So, okay. Now we can run the local machine, local server, and can look what's the response. I start the server. Oops. This should be the right one. Looks better. Okay, so I guess this will also take some minutes. We can look at the building. So now the build process is ongoing. With the hosting option in Amplify, we can do a little bit more. So you have domain management. If you want to provide your own domain, maybe playgroundsdarmstadt.com. You can create notifications on builds. You can create your own environment variables. And what's really cool, it's access control. So if you have a branch, let's assume it's staging, and you want to restrict access, you can set here username and password. So maybe you want showcase your client some new features. You can provide him a separate branch with different or with access control where only he can log in and can see the new feature. So I think it's a really cool feature. And yes, let's look at the local server. Slowly. So, oh. So as you can see here, the call against the GraphQL API from Jan was quite a bit bigger. With Amplify, it's really, really easy to implement this. The query is auto-generated. Yes, it makes your life easier. I have to save this, of course. Okay. We can continue in the presentation. So we have created our backend with our API. We have configured hosting with Amplify and Git. We will see the finished site soon. We have brought backend and frontend together. We will see this as soon the development server has started. For some future ideas, as we mentioned before, this is only the starting point for our app. We can do user-generated content, so we can modify our API that logged-in users are able to post their own playgrounds, to share them. We can build an admin interface to manage the content, and very advanced feature, but with AWS, it's also possible. We can code machine learning for detecting playground features from an image. So if you are providing an image from a playground with a swing, the machine learning model can detect it and set the swing property to our GraphQL data set. So now I hope we're good to go. Okay, this looks good. This looks also good. And here we are. So the only thing we have to do now is connect this to our local data, to our playgrounds array. Data, I guess it's this. And hopefully we will see even one card. Here we go. So, and now our playground, this wouldn't be a good playground with this longitude and latitude. I would not recommend to play there. So our API now is working and we can commit this edit amplify. And push it to our repository. And now back in the console from Amplify, we can see, we should see that there should be a new build triggered. Yes, here we go. And after this deployment was successful, we should see this app with working API under this address. Okay, this could take some minutes, but I'm happy to finally have working API.
think you can also see what the build is doing, right?
Again, please.
I think you can also see what the build is doing, right?
Yes, you can click on the build and you can get the logs. So I can show you this. So here we have the build log. So you can see when there's something not working, you can also see the build log and can debug it. And what Jan mentioned before, with different regions in AWS. So if you are, for example, in Hong Kong, I can switch to Hong Kong. Oh, this is a specific region. So I'm now in Ireland. And everything is gone. So you can imagine when you're coming in the office and you want to check your Amplify app and here you misclicked something and you see this starting screen, you're awake.
Yeah, and one important thing is, I think if you ever developing something for a customer, especially as we are in the Europe zone or on the Europe continent, we have some regulations regarding data protection. And as far as I know, until now, for Netlify, you can't decide exactly where your customers will be accessing the website. And here you can really say, okay, all your application stuff is hosted in Europe, and whenever there's something written to a database, it's also in Europe, and that's important regarding the data protection. Yeah, and this is something that you don't have for all, I think, hosting service like Versal or let's say Netlify. As far as I know, I didn't see the options until now, but maybe you have some different experiences.
Yep. What's a little bit weird is when you are using services to send SMS to a mobile phone. We are using the service. I think it's AWS. Is it Pinpoint? I don't know. I don't want to say something wrong. Nevertheless, you only can send SMS via the region Ireland. So we try to send SMS via Frankfurt, but this service wasn't available in Frankfurt. So you have to send their SMS via Ireland back to Germany to the mobile phone. So a little bit weird, but yes, these are some site restrictions you could face using AWS. Build takes a little bit long. This looks good. Deployment verifies, so refresh. And here we go with our working API hosting on Amplify. And you always should get a nice preview, but I think.
Are there any questions regarding the implementation or regarding AWS Amplify, regarding Vue?
I would like to know how much does it cost to run an, yes, let's say average project on AWS Amplify, because yeah, you can type some values into the pricing calculator, but what are your
experiences?
Experiences, right.
What is an average project for you?
Yes, it's that's the thing.
I would say for the average project for us, we never exceed the free tier. So I don't know if we paid anything for now for any project, because we are always below our free tier. So, but if you are extend your Amplify project, for example, we have a project with EC2 instances which get auto-configured by Lambda functions which are running in our Amplify project. Of course, this would lead to costs from the instances, but overall, I would say with small starting projects, you should never run over the free tier.
Okay, that's quite cool.
So that means if you have some Lambda functions, the GraphQL API, also what is with mobile applications? Do you have some projects with mobile applications?
Yes, we are using Amplify for some mobile application projects, and are really happy with it, because as you can see, if it works, it's really easy.
And I think what is important is really that Amplify provides many features like monitoring, CI/CD, hosting for your static application, which queries the API. You saw that you can use GraphQL and a REST API. You also have S3 buckets that you can connect. I think you can also add your own S3 buckets, right? To upload, for example, content. No.
You can set trigger to your buckets. So we are using trigger in S3. When our customer uploads an XML file, our bucket recognizes this and get proceed by Lambda function. And this with a few clicks and you are good to go. Okay. So I would be really happy to show you the working API.
Are there any further questions? Could we use a relational database in Amplify? So there's one question in the chat of, sorry, Chauki Ben. Sorry, I can't say the name properly. Sorry. So Chris.
So the default database is always a DynamoDB, which is no SQL, but I would say with Amplify, sounds like a marketing word. Everything is possible. So if you want a service which is not provided under the hood from AWS Amplify, you can create Lambda functions in Amplify to connect, or APIs to connect to databases or other services. So as I mentioned before, we are using EC2 instances in our Amplify projects, but EC2 isn't a service provided by Amplify directly. So you can extend Amplify with custom features and yeah.
Basically with all services from AWS. The important thing is that there's a free tier in AWS, and if you Google for AWS free tier, I think there's also some kind of tool which shows you which services are available in the free tier, and then you can decide. For example, for Lambda, there are a certain amount of requests per year or something, which are free, and at some point it costs you the amount of computation of the function itself. So if you write good code and it's properly optimized, it costs less CPU cost, and you will have less to pay.
So as a little side note, if you do some minor changes, no, not something big, you can shorten this command with --y, so you don't get asked again if you are sure to do the cloud sync, the push. I will really often use this command, so you don't always have to yes. So yeah, as a little side hint.
A little bit like a force push.
Yeah. So and after we're hopefully creating this API successfully, I push this repository back to GitHub with my changes, and this push this push, oh boy, this push triggers a new build at the Amplify hosting service. So yeah, it's the same like Netlify or something like this. Any millionaires in the chat who want to sponsorship me some new MacBook?
From which year is your MacBook?
2015.
Oh, okay. I thought I have the older one because mine was not that slow, but I have the one of 2017, and that explains it a little bit.
Yeah, together with screen sharing and webcam and second monitor,
no.
This thing goes crazy.
Are there any further questions?
Maybe we can look shortly in the documentation. There you can see all out-of-the-box services from Amplify, which you can simply use with the CLI. Yeah, you can choose your programming language. Here's Vue. So these are the basic components from Amplify which you can use. It's API we are currently using, hopefully successfully. Authentication has also some cool out-of-the-box components where you can simply import with 2 lines of code fully functional login screen. You can also customize this login screen. Data store is some kind of API for offline access. Geo is really new. I think it's in beta now, so you can easily integrate maps into your app and location search. Interactions, you can implement easily chatbots. PubSub, I think it's IoT, yeah, IoT, so with MQTT and WebSockets for the hardware guys. Storage under the hood, of course, is AWS S3, and you have for each case really good examples which get you to the, I would say, the base, and you can extend it as you need it. Server-side rendering is a feature, yeah, and XR, but these are some services I really never used before. Maybe they are cool, but I don't have a use case for it now. So here you have your VR component out of the box.
Yeah, thank you for visiting us today or being in the meetup today, and leave us some feedback wherever you want. Thank you very much.